So let me talk and give an illustration of the methodology that we're going to use to do this deconstruction. And let me just begin by suggesting that all of the attempts at Christianity from Constantine, after the Apostolic Church, all the way through till right now today, all of those attempts, all the traditions, all the revolutions, all the reformations, all the restorations, i.e. Joseph Smith and Alexander Campbell and those like him, Church of Christ, let's just pretend that's one beautiful, big, ornate church. All of that is represented by this beautiful, ornate, unbelievable physical church. Imagine that in your mind. See it as you will. This singular building represents all the worst and all the very best that has happened in Christianity since Constantine till today. The problem is that the majority of people, in my opinion, who go in and out of this church on Sunday or Saturday or whatever, continue to walk out sick. And what I mean by this is their biblical perspective is diseased. Now, I know you're thinking, who the heck do you think you are? I'm just telling you how I see it. And I am as wrong as any other guy or as right as any other guy. But I'm just telling you, I think we have walked out diseased. Now, there's been all sorts of theories on how to fix this building. And let's liken that to people going in and painting the interior. All right? And that will fix people walking out sick. So, you know, we've had something called the emergent church as of late. And we've had pietism from the Lutheran Church. And we've had 24/7 prayer movements that were popular back in the day. We've had charismatic and hyper-charismatic movements, neo-Pentecostalism. There's been the latter rain movement. Those of you who have come out of Mormonism probably aren't familiar with these things. There's been Christian ecumenism, family values focus, Christian Torah submission and Zionism, restorationism. Of course, there's evangelicalism and its far right-wing conservative fads. There's a focus on creationism. There's focuses on the family. There's free grace movements that are popular and growing now, even hyper grace movements that are taking over and painting the walls. We've had the holiness movement, the house church movement, small group movement, neo-orthodoxy, new thought, prosperity, postmodernism, Christian anarchy, Christian communalism, kingdom now, and dominionist movements. The Christian right, the Christian left, Christian green, Christian socialism. There's even been a code of paint called Christian atheism. I mean, we've had the social gospel, we've had millennialism, and we've had a truckload of eschatological views that shade every hue of the color of the walls of that great building. But in the end, none of this stuff has cogently, in my opinion, and sufficiently made a dent at healing the diseased views of the people that walk out of that mega giant church every single week over the course of Christian history. It has only served to whitewash over the problems and create such confusion and division that people ultimately just say, I'm going to go back to the simplicity of Christ, which is a good thing, and I'm just going to believe and try to do my best in love. And that's what, that happens. And maybe that's God's plan. What would we do to a literal building before we tried to make reparations? We would, of course, to remove vermin and infestation and dry rot and black mold and termites and leprosy. Would we just paint over it? We wouldn't. We would deconstruct it first. And we would say these things need to be pulled out and replaced with something different. Now, do not think for a second that I am suggesting a new denomination to the 33,000. I am not suggesting a new church to go and fit in with the giant model. I'm suggesting just some models and some ideas that all the denominations ought to consider to help remove all the stuff so that another view can take place because of what I believe the ultimate demise of the physical institution will occur. So the first issue that needs to be fixed is to provide a revised view of the Bible as a whole and how believers relate to it. Let me repeat that along with the graphic. Provide a revised view of the Bible as a whole and how believers are to relate to it. I do not mean the individual lines and tenets and doctrines and words, no. I just mean how we view that, all right? We touched on this last week and intimated strongly that the Bible ought to be understood subjectively and spiritually, not objectively and physically any longer. Until this happens, the 33,000 Christian denoms will only grow and continue to fight with each other. Secondly, I would suggest that we have been operating on a partial and therefore a faulty definition of what it means to be a Christian. If you talk to the Jesus movement, they'll say, I'm saved, born again Christian. It's all about being born again. You're saved, you're saved. Some say, I've been forgiven. Christians aren't perfect, they're just forgiven. Some say that they need to behave like Jesus to be a Christian. And so I think a revised definition of Christianity needs to be understood, and I'm not sure that it is. In my opinion, and this is very faulty, I'm sure, Christians are saved by grace through faith to love by suffering as Christ. Christians are saved by grace through faith to love by suffering as Christ. I think it's the most contextual definition. If someone has a better one, bring it. Let's look at it. I'm sure there could be. But I mean, it's not just Christians are saved, and not just by grace, and not just through faith, and not just to love, and not just to suffer. It has to bring in the whole model. Third, and this is going to be a tough one, I would suggest that we have to allow for an unhealthy view of the purpose of the church to stop existing in our lives. Remove what we have allowed the church to become. So to remove what we have allowed the church to become means that the people have to say no more. The people have to say, we don't think that this is the way. We don't need bigger buildings. We don't need more band members. We don't need more seats. We don't need tithes. We don't need to have a super big budget. We just need to get together and read the word and go home and make friends, especially if it's a subjective relationship. We don't need the programs. If the people want to create a program, they can. The church doesn't need to construct all this stuff. So it's going to remove what we have allowed, and we have allowed it because we've been lazy, the church to become. Fourth, I would suggest that Christians have a misguided, even a diseased view of God's sovereignty and his ultimate will and purposes. And we're going to talk about that in about 2 months. And finally, we need to understand by and through the Bible that Jesus has returned physically, that he came back in 70 AD, and that all of the church's emphasis since have been nothing but misappropriated angst and attention on getting used by people to keep their congregates on high alert. The high alert method. Keep you ready. Talking about his imminent coming. Been doing it for 2,000 years. I glommed onto that, being taught by Chuck Smith. I believed in the imminent rapture, physical rapture of the entire church from this earth before the tribulation. I believed in all those things fully, completely, until I started studying. And once I started studying, my eyes opened to some things from a pastor back in North Carolina who said, I taught the same thing forever and ever and ever until I started studying. And what did we study? The Bible. And when we go back next week and we start to dissect what Jesus said and what his apostles have said about his return, there will be no question in your mind about when he returned. Now, don't let this equate to hopelessness in your mind. We all are raptured still. When you die, you're raptured, you're taken up. We all have a second coming. When we meet Christ, it's our second coming. It's a spiritual sense, physically fulfilled by Christ in his church in 70 AD, spiritually met ever since by believers who die. There's a judgment then, just like there was a judgment on Jerusalem. All the same principles are there spiritually. But we have made a mistake to continually, for 2,000 years, teach it's happening in any moment. And I know right now we have signs going on in Israel. We've had signs going on in Israel too. And I could be wrong on whether he will return a third time. I don't know that. But what I can say, without question, is he returned in 70 AD. So, bold as this will sound, it's my humble opinion that if we could just agree to deconstruct, to pull down, uproot, and destroy these illegitimate notions and then rebuild them spiritually, the body of Christ will be blessed beyond measure and will be fortified against the destruction of the church system in the decades to come, which I believe are inevitable.